Hello and welcome back to another episode of Generation Ochi. My name is American Ben, and today we're going to explain the ending of Squid Game. Now, I know, this has been done to death already, and while death is a central focus of this channel, banality is not. I had actually planned to do a video on one of the characters for today, but instead I'm doing this because I think that everyone has sort of missed some things about the ending of the show. And stick with me here. I'm gonna go over everything from the meaning of the secret inspector to Gi-hun's red hair. But I have to work up to these things, and I will. So by the end of the video, hopefully I'll have you at a point where you won't be raring to accuse me of clickbait in the comments below. My overall thesis for the end of the show is this. There's a sort of quasi-religious message that rounds out the finale, but it's not separated from Squid Game's economic message, which hollows about the modern state of capitalistic societies. First, I want to think about Squid Game itself. Not the show, but the sixth and final game in the show's competition. If you've seen the comprehensive breakdown we did of Squid Game, kudos to Congo for an excellent edit, then you've heard me say that Squid Game, despite its various rules, is essentially a fight to the death, mano-y-mano, just like the entirety of a competitive market-based society. Well, I still believe this stands true, but we can say a bit more about it. You'll recall the rules of the game go as follows. There are two players, or two teams of players, one who is assigned the position of offense and the other defense based on a coin toss. The two teams then position themselves on an abstract drawing of a squid. The offensive players at the circle overlapping the head of the squid, and the defensive players within the squid. One of the offensive players, or attackers, must run past the defense and tap the squid's head from the inside of the squid's body with his foot to win. However, the attackers are given a handicap. They can only hop on one foot unless they cross through the squid's neck, an accomplishment called the secret inspector, which we'll talk about in a bit because it's, in the words of Immanuel Kant, some deep ass shit. Don't look that up. Anyway, in the show, we see attackers travel across the neck on 2 feet, but in real life examples I've seen, the attackers also have to hop on 1 foot in this area until they get to the circle on the other side. The show doesn't really explain the rules well, but the squid can only be entered from its base. If a player enters or exits the squid at another part, neck aside, then that player is eliminated. Thus, the defending team can win by pushing all of the attackers out of the squid at a point besides the circle at the base, or by pulling all of the attackers into the squid at a point besides the circle at the base. Lastly, if there comes a situation where a player cannot continue playing, then that player is eliminated, and if none of the players on a team can continue, then the other team wins. Squid Game is the sixth game for a reason. It's the epitome, the perfect metaphor for a capitalistic market-driven society.
Among all the games that kids played back then, it was the most physical and violent.
People start on the outside of the bubble of riches and power looking in, and from their lowly position, they're beset with disadvantages from birth, akin to having to hop on one leg. Think of the shape of the squid itself. It's a pyramid whereby the higher a player gets on the squid, the less room there is for players to fit, and presumably the less players will make it there anyway. The pyramid that is the squid is an illustration of the distribution of wealth and power in society. There are few doors to get into the game, and once an aspirant player gets in, he has to fight his way to the top in a bloody battle against his fellow man, who's been set against him at risk of his own livelihood. All the while, the elites who constructed this violent game watch the massacre from the comforts of luxurious spaces in the sky, bulwarked from the danger the 99% is constantly privy to. Then, if a player does make it to the top of the capitalist pyramid, he's afforded the delusion of ultimate power over the masses.
그 순간 나는 세상을 다 가진 것처럼.
Now let's try to start and extrapolate the structure and function of this game to the larger world Squid Game takes place within. What happens to Gi-hun after the game? Well, he becomes depressed, despondent over the year he spends outside of the game. Why? Well, perhaps partly because his mother died while he was in the game, and his daughter left for America. But most of all, it's the competition itself that left him in this state of disrepair, donning a vagabondish mane. He didn't give in to greed during the course of the game. He didn't concede his essence and lose himself to money lust like Sang-woo did.
형이랑 걔랑 둘이 그만두면 다 끝나니까 돈도 없이 그냥 여기서 나가야 되니까.
Sang-woo was overcome by the system. He soiled himself by attempting to win the game. He gave into its call to savagery and deemed his greed just by convincing himself that he was too deep to be saved anyway.
우리 되돌리게 너무 멀리 왔어.
I suppose many people in the market feel a similar way, that they've sacrificed their purity for success, and if they stop now, their sin was made for no gain. Better to sink deeper into hell than climb a surface empty-handed. Gi-hun did not acquiesce to the game's tempts the same way. And yet still, what became of him?
그 돈, 난 절대 여기서 가지고 못 나가.
Well, he still committed acts of violence. He still devolved into a wrathful beast and bore his claws against his fellow man. The system sort of tricked him into going down the path it planned for him by making him believe that his anger was manifesting for the end of justice, and that his violent urges were righteous, spewed forth in the name of Sang-woo's last victim, Kang-se-byuk. The system got him regardless of his fortitude and left all of his friends dead despite his attempts to save them, and for it, he's left feeling nihilist sentiments towards existence. So where does Gi-hun go from here? Well, the final episode is a true finale. It finishes off Gi-hun's emotional and spiritual arc that began in episode 1. When he exited the game, he was confronted with a fork in the road, a choice he couldn't avoid, one way leading to cynicism and the other to faith in humanity. When he first left the competition, he got into a limousine where the front man accompanied him back to the outside world. He directed an inquiry towards the game's mysterious purveyor as to his intentions.
왜 이런 짓을 하는 거지?
경마 좋아하시죠? 당신들은 말입니다. 의외였어요. 당신은 얼마 달리지 못할 줄 알았는데.
The frontman, played by one of my favorite actors of all time, Gi-hun, draws a parallel between the game's contestants and the horses in a horse race, an analogy that Gi-hun can understand as he frequently gambled on horse races. The frontman implies that Gi-hun and his fellow players in the game were just pawns for the entertainment of the rich, a game created solely to pleasure the elite and allow the members of that class to wage their wealth for but the sake of fun. A cutting reproach of a capitalist society wherein the elites pit the mass of people against each other for their mere amusement. But we've covered that idea in previous videos. What we haven't mentioned, however, is how this analogy connects with Gi-hun's evolution over the course of the show. Returned to society, Gi-hun woke up on the city streets where a Christian street preacher was imploring sinners to repent. The preacher spotted Gi-hun, walked over to him, and took his blindfold off. The symbolism of the Christian helping the wayward soul to see is more than subtle here, but that's not to say that Squid Game is necessarily Christian propaganda. For instance, the pastor in the competition certainly wasn't made out to be on the right track to anything. So, what's the significance of the preacher? Well, this question takes us to Gi-hun and Il-nam's final meeting at the end of the show. Now we're getting to the good stuff. If you've seen our past videos on the show, then you've heard me posit that Il-nam used this conversation to do a few things. First, he wanted to inquire as to why Gi-hun hadn't spent any of the money and convince him to do so.
자네가 상금은 손도 대지 않고 그대로 산다고 들었어.
He also tried to pull Gi-hun into another game, this time a bet as to whether or not someone would help a homeless man down on the street below before midnight.
누군가 저 사람을 도와주면 자네가 이기는 거야.
As we said in the large explanation video we did, this was Il-nam demonstrating that his power, that is, the power of the elite, reaches beyond the confines of the game arena. It pervades society. It is society. During the back and forth, Il-nam also attempted to break Gi-hun's trust in man via their latest bet as just described.
자네의 운도 이젠 다 했나 보군. 정말 아직도 사람을 믿나?
And finally, Il-nam also used the time to explain to Gi-hun that the reason he let him live is because he had fun playing with him, and that he actually created the entire game to recreate the fun he experienced during his childhood.
자네 덕에 기억도 나지 않던 오래전 일들이 떠올랐어.
As we've explained before, the longing for childhood is a major theme in the show, and the show says that the purity of childhood cannot be rightfully restored by perverted adults. However, there's a deeper meaning to this dialogue. Let's jump back to when Gi-hun was sitting by the water and a poor flower lady approached him and asked him to buy her wares. She, of course, left him not only with a flower, but a card featuring an invite to meet Il-nam. According to the card, the reunion was to take place on Christmas Eve, the night before the apocryphal date of Jesus' birth, on the 7th floor of a building called the Sky Building. Okay, now we have a lot to go over here. First off, the building is called the Sky Building, apparently alluding to the celestial nature of the building. As one ascends it, they get closer to the sky. Perhaps even the various floors are levels of heaven. The meeting took place on the 7th floor. Now, the New Testament, the primary text of Christian theology, doesn't mention a 7th heaven, but the Talmud, a central text of Jewish law and theology, suggests that the upper part of the universe is made up of 7 heavens, the 7th being the highest heaven and the dwelling of the seraphim and the throne of God. Il-nam was thus waiting for Gi-hun at the throne of God. The seraphim are celestial or heavenly beings who sit atop the hierarchy of angels in Christian theology. They are the highest angels. There's more though. According to blueletterbible.org, the word seraphim is mentioned 7 times in different forms throughout the Bible, and comes from the Hebrew word saraph, which I'm pronouncing from the Hebrew letters you can see right here. Saraph means serpent, or fiery serpent. In Numbers 21:6, God sends fiery serpents among the Israelites to punish them for speaking against him and Moses, and the serpents killed many of them. Maybe the death games were punishment from God in response to man's sin. I'm not going to conclude that for sure, but in any case, now we have this image of a fiery serpent, which is actually an angelic being sent from God to manifest God's anger and do divine work. Why are these serpents described as fiery? Well, according to Blue Letter Bible, fiery either refers to the burning effect of the snake's poison, or to their fiery copper color. Now let's talk about Gi-hun's hair. At the end of the final episode, he dyed his hair red. Now, as we asserted in our long explanation video, this action can be seen as a move to reject societal norms and forge a new identity, and indeed I think that stands as a valid take. However, we can extrapolate the meaning of this to a deeper level. But before I get into that, I must acknowledge that a bevy of articles were published in the last few days which explained why Gi-hun dyed his hair red. And they actually quoted Squid Game's very creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk. What did Dong-hyuk say? Quote, "I imagined being Gi-hun and thought to myself, what is the color that you would never choose to dye your hair? Then I came to the conclusion that Gi-hun would never dye his hair red. It would be the craziest thing for him to do," end quote. According to the article, Dong-hyuk also added that the flaming red hair conveyed Gi-hun's inner anger and rage towards the organizers of the death games. Now, I'm not one to assert that the creator of the show is wrong about his own material. However, I think like any good artist, Dong-hyuk isn't telling the full story here, and no, I don't think he made the decision to have an entire scene dedicated to Gi-hun dyeing his hair just to say he's angry. I mean, he was angry, but this anger was a divine anger, and his hair dyeing represented his transformation into a fiery serpent, a seraphim, an angel of God on earth to do divine work. Perhaps the games were just a test for Gi-hun. One he passed, and he was thus invited to ascend to the 7th heaven and become an angel. I'm not going to say this is true for sure, but metaphorically speaking, this explanation certainly works out. Il-nam came off as sort of an omniscient being. Gi-hun unleashed his fiery rage on Il-nam during their final meeting, and Il-nam just stayed calm, unafraid, sure of himself.
너 누구야? 왜 날 살려준 거야?
나랑 게임 한 번 더 하지.
This conversation might represent a passing of the torch from one angel to another, or perhaps even the elevation of a man to angel by God itself.
자네는 뭘 걸 텐가?
뭐든지 어차피 당신이 원하면 다 가져갈 수 있잖아.
Though he didn't realize it, here Gi-hun submitted to his God. He gave Il-nam all of himself, whatever the old man wanted to take, because he could have taken anything he wanted anyway. What being has such power but God? However, this doesn't invalidate the show's message about capitalism, because in this case, the elite, the 1%ers who manipulate the lives of the masses, are God. God entered himself into the game to have some fun with his horses.
보는 것이 하는 것보다 더 재미있을 수가 없지.
Can a god truly understand the plight of man, so rarefied from material life as gods often are? Il-nam scolded Gi-hun for tricking him during the marbles game.
그럼 자네가 날 속이고 내 굿을 가져간 건 말이 되고?
Here's this divinely powerful being lecturing a powerless human for cheating at a game it created and pushed him into. This dynamic describes the very contradiction of God and religion. God creates a world of limited resources, creates man with a sinful nature, and then blames him for sinning. God can't understand the impossible situation he has forced upon humans, because even if humans are made in its image, humans are not God. The low and poor, the 99%, do not have the security and resources of the rich and powerful.
나는 아무 얘기도 게임을 강요한 적이 없어.
God can't understand how the players were forced into the game because God has not experienced the difficulties of human life. The same as how the rich can't understand how hard it is for the masses to lift themselves up from the bottom rung of society. Rather, the spoiled gods make people's problems worse.
우리나라 가계비 증가 속도가 여전히 세계 최상위권을 유지하는 것으로 나타났습니다.
The policies enacted by the elites lead people astray. When Gi-hun spoke to the game representative on the phone at the airport, he said this.
사람이야. 그래서 궁금해. 너희들이 누군지, 어떻게 사람에게 이런 짓을 할 수 있는지.
He never thought to himself, perhaps these mysterious, powerful people are just cruel. Perhaps God is just cruel and humans are stuck in a world, the unwitting horses to a depraved master. Gi-hun told the game rep that he wouldn't forgive the game's creators for what they've done.
그래서 난 용서가 안 돼. 너희들이 하는 짓.
And rather than get on the plane bound for America to see his daughter, he presumably set about tracking down the people responsible for Squid Game. This isn't a moment that's supposed to make us feel very good. Gi-hun was seemingly about to get things right for once. He was about to put his daughter first. He was safe, he made it out of the game, and could now leave it behind and move on with his life. But he didn't, and we're left to question why heading into Season 2. Maybe he's gonna end up trying to take down the game's creators and the game altogether. Or maybe he ends up learning more about the origins of the game and becomes its next frontman. One question we're left to ponder is how the current frontman landed in his current role after winning the game. What brought him back to the arena? Perhaps Gi-hun's divine anger will be directed towards the masses, and he, as the fiery serpent, will look to punish them. For now, what we can say is that turning around and heading back into the troubled society he was on the cusp of escaping does fit the description of his new duties as an angel of God. People are suffering. Their troubles are being leveraged against them by bored elites who want to pull them into a trial of death. Both the one involving warped versions of childhood games and the larger cutthroat competitive market. Gi-hun is now on Earth to intercede. In the death games, he tried to save people and failed. Now, newly empowered, he'll try again. When Gi-hun and Sang-woo played Squid Game as kids, they called the act of an attacker passing over the squid's neck and gaining the ability to walk on 2 feet, the secret inspector.
암행어사.
이유는 알 수 없지만 우린 그걸 암행어사라고 불렀다.
Writing in the Korea Times in 2014, Professor Sim Jae-woo, at the time a member of the faculty of the Academy of Korean Studies in Seongnam, South Korea, described the historic role secret inspectors or secret royal inspectors played during the Joseon dynasty, the last dynastic kingdom in Korea and the precursor state to modern South Korea. According to the article, secret inspectors, or amhangyosa, sorry about the pronunciation, I'm sure it's not right, were young and incorruptible officials appointed by the king who were sent to provinces around the Korean state undercover in order to monitor the welfare of the people. They would root out corruption, identify injustice, address people's grievances, and report everything back to the king, who would then take action based on the inspector's findings. We can perhaps compare the act of an official making a risky trek across the country in disguise with a stealthy attacker in Squid Game daring to travel across the well-guarded neck of the squid without defenders catching him. Both times, the player descends into the heart of chaos as furtively as possible, and if successful in traversing his treacherous path, he can enter the system of power within which a deadly game is played. The secret royal inspectors would commonly travel donning rags instead of official uniforms, to both remain undercover and identify with the plight of the people. The inspectors were also often put in precarious positions. They traveled with little money and had to seek quarter in sketchy places. And they were agents of the king looking to spot corruption. If local officials became aware of their presence, they might send an assassin to kill the inspector. We can draw a parallel between this and the way it's dangerous when citizens in society attempt to bring down powerful, corrupt people. Finally, inspectors did have their advantages. For instance, they kept on their person requisition tablets which featured horse symbols. The number of horses carved into a given tablet signified the amount of horses an inspector could commandeer from Korean citizens for the purposes of carrying out his duties. The tablets were also a way for the inspectors to prove their identity. According to the professor, overall the secret royal inspector system was highly effective at curbing the corruption of officials in the kingdom and bettering the lives of ordinary people. Now, Gi-hun feels beholden to the duties of the inspector.
기억나? 여기 지나면 뭐라고 했는지? 어명어서.
To me, the reason that he reminded Sang-woo about the secret inspector was to rebuke his friend for hurting others, and to imply that it's their job, being embedded in society, to look out for people and help them, lead them rather than compound upon their suffering. And I can't help but think that the writer of Squid Game is calling for people, not just South Koreans, but people in all competitive market-driven societies, to adopt the mentality and duties of secret inspectors in order to rid their environments of corruption. Earlier in this video, I bemoaned the cruelty of the show's God. Well, given what we've explored since, maybe my criticism of God is short-sighted, because the truth is that God is omniscient and can understand what humans cannot.
나를 보게 삶은 짧아.
Perhaps the struggles of life are not the punishment that we think they are, but are intended to make us grow. Il-nam repeatedly tested Gi-hun's faith in humanity.
아직도 사람을 믿나? 그 일을 겪고도.
Yet, I don't necessarily get the sense that Il-nam wanted Gi-hun to lose his faith in man. I'm not sure about that. But we're not supposed to be sure yet. The next season of the show will probably confirm whether here the old man was trying to break Gi-hun or rehabilitate him. We don't know the true nature of Squid Game's God. What we do know is that someone showed up to help the homeless man on the street below, and to some extent, Gi-hun's faith in humanity, or just his faith period, was restored. Actually, it seems that in a way, playing the game, experiencing what he did in the game, saved Gi-hun. Changed him, inspired him to ascend to a higher level of being. Now he sees the suffering of the people. Now he can help them.
잘 들어. 난 말이 아니야. 사람이야.
He knows he's not a horse to be mastered. He's the guy who masters the horses, commandeers the horses, rides the horses, to save the kingdom. Now, rather than acquiesce to the system, he's going to take an active role in bettering the world around him. Because he survived such abominable suffering, he isn't afraid to address it. We may feel nervous that he's headed back towards the game, but what we have to understand is that his fear is gone, because he's no longer afraid to lose anything, even his life. He's already faced death, and on the contrary, he's willing to give everything he has, including his life if need be, to better the world for the people in it, and better the people for the blessed world they inhabit, and thus keep them from being condemned to a game of death. Anyways, that's my take on the ending of the show. I hope you think it transcended clickbait. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a big thumbs up. Please comment down below. Let me know what you think of all of this. Let me know what you think is going to happen in Season 2 if there is a Season 2. Subscribe to this channel and hit that damn notification bell so you don't miss a damn thing. For now, my name is American Ben, and I'll catch you next time. Generation Ochi, peace.